In the summer of 1871, a Kansas Pacific train stopped moving. Not a mechanical failure, not a storm. The engineer looked out his window and saw the plains ahead of him moving. The herd stretched to every horizon, brown and black and endless, pressing against the sky from north to south, a living wall of animal and sound and smell. He waited 3 days. 3 days while the earth shook beneath his train. 3 days before the last animal crossed the tracks and the grass went still again. He wrote it in his log, without drama. By 1871, these delays were routine. What that engineer saw was not simply a large group of animals. It was the foundation of a civilization. The North American bison herd, at its height, numbered somewhere between 30 and 60 million animals, the largest land migration on Earth. A moving continent of muscle and bone and warm breath crossing the same grass they had crossed for 10,000 years. The Lakota people called the buffalo Tatanka, and they did not simply hunt Tatanka. They organized their entire existence around it. Their calendar, their theology, their military strategy, their trade economy, their understanding of what a human life was for. This is not the story of people who were good hunters. This is the story of a civilization that looked at 60 million animals and understood, with a clarity that took centuries to build, exactly what was being offered. They built their world on it. They defended it with a ferocity that stunned the most powerful army on Earth. And then, in 13 years, the buffalo were gone. Not by nature, not by drought, by design. We will get there. But first we go back, to the plains before the Lakota came, to the grass before the horse, to the world that existed before any of this was imaginable. Tonight, we go back. The Great Plains do not offer obvious grandeur. No mountains, no deep forests, no dramatic skyline. Standing at the center of them, a person feels small in a specific way, not because of height or depth, but because of openness. The sky is larger than the land. The horizon is everywhere. Turn in any direction, and there is nothing between you and the place where the blue meets the earth. This has never been empty land. It only looks empty to eyes that do not know what they are seeing. The Great Plains stretch from what is now Alberta in the north to the Texas Panhandle in the south, from the Missouri River in the east to the base of the Rockies in the west. 1 million square miles of grassland. The grass is the key to everything. Not dramatic grass, short grass and mixed grass prairie, knee-high in a wet year, brown and brittle in a dry one, but its roots reach 3, 4, 5 feet into the soil. When fire passes over, the roots are untouched. When drought comes, the roots go deeper. The grass that looks dead in August is not dead. It is waiting. This resilience made the plains capable of sustaining what they sustained. The bison of North America evolved here over hundreds of thousands of years. A bull weighs 2,000 pounds. It runs at 35 miles an hour. It survives 40 below zero by turning its massive skull into the wind, using bone and fur as a shield. It is perfectly suited to its world. The first humans arrived in North America somewhere between 15 and 20,000 years ago. They followed the megafauna south and east, mammoths, giant ground sloths, ancient camels, the short-faced bear, 8 feet at the shoulder. They hunted. And the technique they developed for hunting bison has a name that doesn't capture what it actually was. The buffalo jump. At a place in what is now Alberta, called Head-Smashed-In Buffalo Jump, kills began at least 6,000 years ago and continued for millennia. Hunters spread out in a wide V-shape across the plain, stretching for miles. They carried rocks, branches, bits of hide. They waved and shouted. The herd began to move. The V funneled them. The momentum of animals behind pushing animals in front carried the led bison over a cliff edge before they understood what was ahead. At the bottom, the whole community waited. This is not primitive. This is 10,000 person-hours of accumulated ecological knowledge, precise understanding of animal behavior, terrain, wind, and timing. Then there were the settled peoples. The Mandan built circular earthen lodges along the Missouri River, large enough for 30 people and their horses through a Dakota winter. They grew corn and beans in the river bottomlands. Their trade networks reached from the Rockies to the Gulf of Mexico. The Arikara lived to the south. Also farmers, also traders, a complex ceremonial life, and a social structure built on clan membership. The Pawnee aligned their lodges to the stars. Specific constellations marked when to plant and when to move. They did not simply observe the sky, they organized their lives around it. These are the peoples the Lakota would eventually displace. But the Lakota did not arrive as conquerors from outside the continent. They were part of the same 10,000-year human story of this land. They were simply moving, and something was about to give them the speed to do it. The word Lakota means allies, or more precisely, friends, people who are connected. The word points at a relationship rather than a group, which tells you something important about how the Lakota understood themselves. They saw themselves as a collection of bands, bound by language, by kinship, by shared ceremony, a confederation they called the Oseti-Sakowin. The Seven Council Fires. Before the mid-17th century, the Lakota lived east of the Missouri River, deep forest, lake country, a world of birch and pine and wild rice and still water. They knew how to move through it. They traveled by canoe. They hunted deer and elk. The buffalo were there to the west, and seasonal hunts onto the prairie were part of their life, but they were not yet a plains people. The pressure that pushed them west came from the east. The fur trade had reshaped everything. European demand for beaver pelts created a commercial economy that moved through native networks at extraordinary speed. The Ojibwe, armed with firearms from French and British traders, began pushing west. Their expansion came at the expense of the Lakota and their relatives. The plains were there, open, full of buffalo, the possibility of a different life if you could solve the problem of how to live on open ground. On foot, that problem was nearly unsolvable. Then the horse came. The horse had been extinct in North America for 10,000 years before the Spanish reintroduced it in the late 15th century. From the Spanish settlements in New Mexico, horses spread north through trade networks and through animals that simply got loose. The Lakota began acquiring horses in significant numbers around 1730 or 1740. Within a single generation, almost everything changed. A man on horseback covers 60 miles a day on the plains. A man on foot covers 15. The horse did not simply make travel faster. It rewrote the mathematics of what was possible. On horseback, a skilled rider could pull alongside a running buffalo and kill it in 30 seconds. What had required a community of dozens over days of preparation could now be accomplished by a small group of mounted hunters in an afternoon. The surplus changed everything. More meat, more hides, more of everything the buffalo provided. The Lakota began to trade that surplus. Wealth in horses, in hides, in trade goods. The wealth allowed for larger bands. Larger bands meant greater security. Within 2 or 3 generations, the Lakota had pushed west across the Missouri and onto the Central Plains. They were no longer woodland people making seasonal visits. They were plains people. Permanent settlements disappeared from their culture. The tipi replaced the earthen lodge, because the tipi can be assembled and disassembled in under an hour. The Lakota followed the buffalo, and the tipi followed the Lakota. The expansion was fast. It was contested. The Crow were already there. The Shoshone were there. Each of these nations had their own claims and their own military culture. The Lakota fought, and they were extraordinarily good at it. By the early 19th century, the Lakota dominated a territory roughly the size of Texas. From the Black Hills west into Wyoming and Montana, north to the Yellowstone, south into Nebraska, east to the Missouri. The Black Hills were the center. The Lakota called them Pahasapa, the heart of everything that is. Not metaphor, geography. The forested hills caught rainfall the surrounding plains did not. They held game through hard winters. They had water. They had shelter. They would fight longer for the Black Hills than for anything else in their history. But first, the daily life. A Lakota woman in the year 1820 woke before the sun. The tipi was still dark, still warm from the coals of last night's fire. The buffalo hide walls, thick and smoked until nearly waterproof, held the cold at bay. Outside, the late winter air was below freezing. She knew this without going out. She built up the fire first. The fuel was buffalo chips, dried dung collected through autumn, stored in rawhide containers near the entrance. There was no wood on the Central Plains. For a people who needed fire every day, the buffalo had solved this problem too. The morning meal came from parfleche bags, dried buffalo meat, pemmican, lean meat, mixed with rendered fat and dried berries. A pound of pemmican contained more calories than almost any other portable food on Earth. It lasted for years without spoiling. The buffalo had solved the refrigeration problem too. The Lakota calendar was not built around months. It was built around the movements and conditions of the buffalo herds. January was the moon of popping trees, the cold so extreme that frozen cottonwood trunks split with sounds like rifle shots. February was the moon of the raccoon. March, the moon of the snowblind, when the sun climbed and the snow reflected it with ferocity enough to damage unprotected eyes. The Lakota made visors from bone, thin strips with narrow slits. The first sunglasses. By April, the moon of the birth of calves, the world softened. Buffalo cows were dropping young on the open plains. This was not a time to hunt heavily. This was a time to watch, to track, to learn. May and June brought the great summer gathering. This was what the Kansas Pacific engineer would have seen. The scattered winter bands merged into the great summer encampment. Hundreds of lodges, thousands of people. The smoke of cooking fires, visible from 20 miles away. The summer hunt was collective. Community survival, managed with military precision. Scouts went first, young men, good riders, trained to find herds without disturbing them. They read the grass for signs of heavy grazing. They read the sky for circling ravens following the insects kicked up by moving animals. They read the wind for the smell, a heavy, musky presence that preceded a large herd by miles. The huntmaster made the decisions. A surrounds hunt began before dawn. Hunters moved in total silence, circling wide around the sleeping herd. A single cough, a horse's snort, could send animals running at 35 miles an hour across terrain where they could not be caught. At dawn, the circle closed. A skilled hunter on a trained horse needed about 30 seconds per animal. The horse knew its job as well as the rider. A buffalo horse, trained from birth, positioned itself precisely alongside the running animal. The hunter never looked at the horse. The horse watched the buffalo. The hunter watched the buffalo. The arrow went in behind the left shoulder. After the hunt, the women came. A single adult cow contained 400 pounds of meat, 30 pounds of edible organ, a hide weighing 60 to 90 pounds, sinew along the spine for bowstrings, leg bones whose marrow was rendered into fat, a stomach lining that became a cooking container, dung that became fuel, a brain that, mixed with fat, produced the supple rawhide that every object in camp was made from. Nothing was left. 12 to 14 hides made one tipi. One tipi represented 12 to 14 months of skilled female labor. The tipi itself was engineering. The lodgepole frame distributed weight evenly. The smoke hole had 2 adjustable ear flaps controlled from inside that managed the draft regardless of wind direction. In a high plains wind, a well-pitched teepee was more stable than most modern houses. Something was already changing at the edges of this world. But this particular afternoon, in this particular summer, the life was still whole. Before the Lakota killed a buffalo, they prayed. Not out of habit, not out of obligation. The prayer was a specific communication, an acknowledgement of relationship, a request for permission. In the Lakota understanding of the world, the buffalo was not simply an animal. It was a relative. The concept of Mitakuye Oyasin, usually translated as all my relatives, was not a poetic sentiment. It was a cosmological statement describing the actual structure of reality. The grass, the water, the stone, the hawk, the human, the buffalo, not separate categories of being, expressions of the same essential force. The Lakota called this force Wakan Tanka. Wakan means sacred, mysterious, beyond ordinary comprehension. Tanka means vast, everywhere present. Wakan Tanka was not a god who lived somewhere else and intervened from outside. Wakan Tanka was the world itself, the sacred quality of existence. The story of the white buffalo calf woman is the story of how the Lakota received their most sacred object. A very long time ago, when the people were hungry and did not know how to live well, two scouts saw a figure approaching across the plain. As she came closer, they saw it was a woman, dressed in white buffalo hide, carrying a bundle. One scout felt desire and reached toward her. A cloud descended over him. When it lifted, he was nothing but bones. The second scout understood and dropped to his knees. The woman walked to the camp and stayed 4 days. She taught the 7 sacred ceremonies. She gave the people the chanan pa, the sacred pipe. She taught them how to pray, how to treat each other, how to honor the earth. Then she walked away and turned first into a red buffalo, then black, then yellow, then into a white buffalo calf. Then she was gone. The white buffalo, perhaps 1 in 10 million births, was the most sacred sign in Lakota spirituality. Its appearance meant the universe was in balance. The covenant between the people and the sacred world was intact. The Chanan Pa connected the earth, represented by the stone bowl, with the sky, represented by the wooden stem, and the human who held both in their hands. The smoke was prayer made visible, rising upward. You did not lie when you held the pipe. This was not superstition. It was a sophisticated social technology. In a society without a written legal code, without a police force, the pipe ceremony was the mechanism for binding commitment. To smoke together was to place your words under the authority of the sacred universe. When American officials eventually made treaties with the Lakota and smoked with them, the Lakota understood this as a sacred binding. When those officials broke those treaties, it was not only political betrayal, it was a violation of the sacred order of existence. The Sundance was the greatest ceremony of the Lakota year. It happened in summer when the bands gathered. It lasted 4 days without food or water for the participants. Some male dancers underwent the piercing on the final day. 2 cuts on either side of the chest, wooden skewers through the cuts, rawhide cords to the central pole. The dancer leaned back against the tension and danced, looking at the sun until the skin gave way. American authorities banned the Sundance in 1883, calling it barbaric. They misunderstood. The only thing a Lakota warrior possessed absolutely was his own body. To offer a piece of it, blood and flesh and the pain of tearing, was to give the most complete gift possible. The Sundance was a prayer written in flesh. The Vision Quest was the most personal ceremony. A young man went alone onto a hilltop without food or water for 4 days. He prayed. He waited. The vision that came gave him his adult identity, his purpose, his connection to the sacred. A man who had not gone on Vision Quest was not fully a man. These are the things that could not be photographed, could not be confiscated, could not be placed in an agency report. They lived in the sound of a woman's voice speaking Lakota to her children after dark. They survived everything. In the spring of 1846, a young Harvard historian named Francis Parkman traveled west from Boston. He was 22 years old, in poor health, and possessed of an enormous ambition. He wanted to see the West before it changed. He had a feeling that something was ending. He spent several weeks with a band of Oglala Lakota along the North Platte River. He wrote about what he saw, with a combination of genuine admiration and the condescension of his time. His account remains one of the most detailed eyewitness records of Lakota life at its height. What struck him most, beyond the physical confidence of the people around him, was simple abundance. He counted tipis until he lost track. He noted the quality of the horses, the efficiency of the women at work, the health and apparent happiness of the children. This was not a people barely surviving. This was a people who had mastered their landscape. The period from roughly 1750 to 1850 was the apex of Lakota power. Territory from the Black Hills west into Wyoming and Montana, north to the Yellowstone, south into Nebraska. Population estimates range from 15 to 25,000 people. 15,000 people on 1,000,000 square miles sounds small. But organized into mobile bands, requiring no permanent infrastructure, supported by a food source of essentially unlimited scale, the Lakota were a force that controlled the heart of the continent. Their political structure was designed for this life. Each band was led by a headman, or itankan, not a king, not even a chief in the way Americans imagine chiefs. The itankan held authority through persuasion and example. His decisions held only as long as people agreed with them. A Lakota man who disagreed could take his family and his horses and join another band. Nothing stopped him. No walls, no debts, no written membership that could be revoked. This produced leadership that was exceptionally responsive to the people, and it was utterly incomprehensible to American negotiators who assumed a chief who signed a treaty could bind all Lakota. He could not. He spoke for the people who had chosen to follow him. Red Cloud, born around 1822, was the greatest war leader the Oglala Lakota produced. He had distinguished himself against the Crow and the Pawnee before he was 30. He was not a chief by heredity. He was a chief by achievement, by combat, by generosity, by the willingness of people to follow him. He was also a diplomat, which was rare. He understood that the Americans were a different kind of problem than the Crow. He understood, with strategic clarity, that fighting the United States Army was not the same as fighting another Plains nation. Crazy Horse, born around 1840, was something different. The accounts describe a man who existed slightly outside the normal register of human beings. He did not take scalps, which was unusual. He did not wear war paint. He gave away his kills and his captured horses. Before battle, he painted only a small lightning bolt on his face and put one hawk feather in his hair. He was seen riding through storms of gunfire, untouched while men beside him fell. Sitting Bull, Tatanka Ayodake, was a medicine man and political leader of extraordinary skill. Hunkpapa Lakota, by the 1860s, the most influential single figure among all the bands combined. He never made peace with the United States. He watched what had happened to the nations of the East when they signed treaties. He watched the Mandan, who had welcomed Lewis and Clark with genuine hospitality in 1804, reduced by smallpox to near extinction by 1837. He watched and he refused. In the height years, the summer camps were still whole. The Sundance rose every year. The buffalo still moved in the ancient patterns. The warriors were still formidable. The American officers who encountered them in the 1850s and 60s were not fools. Many were Civil War veterans who understood what organized military force looked like. In letters home, some of them admitted what was difficult to admit publicly. The Lakota were better at fighting on the plains than they were. Not because the soldiers were cowards, because the plains belonged to the Lakota in a way it did not belong to the soldiers, because the horsemanship was better. Because a Lakota warrior was fighting for his family and his world and every acre of ground he stood on. Something was coming. The older men could feel it, a pressure from the east that had no clear shape yet. But this summer, in this particular year, it was not yet here. In the spring of 1849, 100,000 people left Missouri and headed west. The following spring, another 100,000 followed. By 1853, more than 300,000 emigrants had crossed through the heart of the Buffalo Range, following the Platte River toward California and Oregon. 300,000 people with their oxen and cattle and cholera, and complete inability to understand what they were moving through. They looked at the Great Plains and saw emptiness. They did not see the 30,000 Lakota organized around it, dependent on it, spiritually connected to it. What was not fenced was not used. That was the only framework they had. What they could see was the damage to the grass. The trail cut a scar across the prairie. Hundreds of thousands of oxen and cattle ate the grass along the route. Water holes near the trail were fouled. Game along the trail moved away from the constant traffic. The buffalo began to change their patterns. Not everywhere, not at once, but along the corridors where the trail ran, the herds began to avoid the disturbance. The seasonal movements that the Lakota had calibrated their entire existence around began to shift. This was an alarm. The United States government's response was the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. It acknowledged Lakota sovereignty over a vast territory. It promised annual payments of goods for safe passage along the Oregon Trail. The Lakota who participated understood what they were signing. Passage rights, not land rights, not sovereignty, passage. Within a few years, the goods were arriving late, or corrupt agents were stealing them before they reached the people they were meant for. The boundaries were being ignored by emigrants who cut through Lakota territory at will. Then the army came. Not to protect the Lakota from the emigrants, to protect the emigrants from the Lakota. In 1854, a young lieutenant named John Grattan rode out from Fort Laramie with 29 soldiers to demand the surrender of a Lakota man who had killed an emigrant's wandering cow. The lieutenant was 19 years old and had been on the plains for 3 months. The Lakota leaders offered negotiation, compensation, measured diplomacy. Grattan opened fire instead. The Lakota fought back and killed all 30 men. The army burned a Lakota village the following year. The pattern was set. The disease was moving faster than the soldiers. The epidemic of 1837 had moved up the Missouri River on a steamboat carrying infected passengers. The Mandan, who had numbered 10,000, were reduced to 150 people in months. The Lakota suffered too. Their dispersed settlement pattern offered some protection, but the losses were still devastating. Then the Transcontinental Railroad began. The Union Pacific pushed west from Omaha after the Civil War. The government wanted it done quickly. By 1867, the tracks were cutting through Lakota territory at 2 miles a day. Behind the workers came the towns. Behind the towns came the farms. The most immediate effect was the buffalo hunters. The commercial hide trade had been limited by transportation. You could not profitably move 100,000 buffalo hides from western Kansas to eastern markets by ox wagon. By railroad, you could. In 1871, a Pennsylvania tannery discovered that bison hides made excellent industrial leather, machine belts, shoe soles. The industrial East consumed leather in quantities cattle ranching could not supply. The plains were the answer. Professional hide hunters arrived by the thousands. These were not sportsmen. A good hunter with a large caliber rifle, shooting from a fixed position into a standing herd, killed 60 or 70 animals in a morning. The hides were stripped. The carcasses were left. Millions of pounds of meat, rotting under the plains sun. General Philip Sheridan was asked by the Texas legislature whether the government should protect the remaining herds. His answer was no. The hunters were doing more to solve the Indian problem, he said, than the Army had managed in 30 years. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the record. The destruction of the buffalo was deliberate policy. Red Cloud stood at Fort Laramie in the spring of 1866 and waited. He was 44 years old. He wore a blanket. He carried himself with the stillness of a man who has spent his whole life reading landscapes and people. The government had called another treaty council. They wanted permission to build a road through the Powder River country, the last great buffalo ground in the Lakota world. The road would connect the Missouri settlements to the gold fields in Montana. Red Cloud waited. He listened to the commissioners. He listened to their offers. Then, a column of United States infantry marched into the fort. Colonel Henry Carrington was already building his road. He had not waited for the treaty to be signed. He had brought his troops and his construction teams, and he was building the Bozeman Trail whether the council agreed or not. Red Cloud stood up and walked out. That summer, he began the most effective guerrilla campaign in the history of the American Indian Wars. He did not fight the army in open battle. He did not need to. The Powder River country was Lakota terrain. Every valley, every ridge, every water source was known to the bands who had lived there for 3 generations. The army was moving through country they did not understand, building forts they could not adequately supply, on a road they could not safely travel. Red Cloud made the road unusable. Fort Phil Kearny was attacked or raided more than 50 times in its first 6 months. In December of 1866, a young officer named William Fetterman made his opinion of the Lakota clearly known. With 80 men, he said publicly, he could ride through the entire Sioux Nation. He was given exactly 80 men. Crazy Horse led the decoy party. He rode out in front of the fort, just close enough to be provocative. He appeared wounded, retreating, just killable, staying always just visible, pulling north over Lodge Trail Ridge. Fetterman followed. Over the ridge and into the valley beyond, where several hundred Lakota and Cheyenne warriors waited. Not one of Fetterman's 80 men survived. The fight lasted less than 40 minutes. In 1868, the United States government did something it had not done before and would not do again. It surrendered. The Second Fort Laramie Treaty recognized Lakota sovereignty over the Great Sioux Reservation. It closed the Bozeman Trail and ordered all 3 forts evacuated. It established an unceded Indian territory in the Powder River country. The Black Hills were guaranteed forever. Red Cloud came to sign only after watching the forts burn. It was the only treaty the United States ever signed to end a war it was losing. 6 years later, in the summer of 1874, George Armstrong Custer rode into the Black Hills. His expedition found gold. Within weeks, the news had reached every city in the East. Within months, 10,000 illegal miners were in the Black Hills. The government made nominal attempts to remove them, then stopped. The gold was too valuable. The treaty was not. Sitting Bull called a great council in the spring of 1876. Every Lakota band came. Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho came. The camp on the Little Bighorn River was one of the largest gatherings of Plains people in the 19th century. 12,000 people, 2,000 to 3,000 fighting men. The army came in 3 columns from different directions. On June 17th, General Crook's column met a Lakota and Cheyenne force on the Rosebud River. Crook retreated. 8 days later, on June 25th, Custer's 7th Cavalry attacked the village. 268 United States soldiers died, including Custer. The battle lasted less than an hour. The United States government, humiliated, sent 6,000 soldiers into the Powder River country that winter. Sitting Bull took his people north into Canada. Crazy Horse stayed and fought through the winter, moving constantly. In May of 1877, Crazy Horse came in. Not defeated, not surrendered. He came in because his people were hungry, and there was nowhere left on the plains where they could rest without being hunted. He was arrested 4 months later. In the struggle outside the guardhouse, a soldier's bayonet entered his back. He died that night. He was approximately 36 years old. The exact location of his burial is not known. He asked that it be kept secret. It has been. There is a photograph taken on the southern plains in the early 1880s. A man stands in front of a pile of buffalo skulls, larger than a house. Looking more carefully, you see it is not one pile. It is the near edge of a field of piles, stretching back toward the horizon. The man does not look triumphant. He looks like a worker beside his work. By 1878, the southern bison herd was functionally gone. The hide hunters had killed the last accessible animals and were already moving north. The bones from the southern kills were being collected and shipped east by the carload, sold to fertilizer and glue factories. The northern herd was the Lakota's last protection. In 1882, a single hunter named Doc Zoll and his crew killed between 10 and 20,000 animals in one season in what is now North Dakota. One man, one season. In 1883, the last significant herd on the northern plains was hunted. By 1889, the bison remaining in the United States outside of Yellowstone National Park numbered fewer than 1,000 animals, from 60 million to 1,000. In less than 30 years, what this meant for the Lakota was immediate and total. The food was gone, the raw material for every object in camp, the trade economy, the ritual relationship with the animal at the center of their spiritual world. All of it, physically, gone. The Lakota, on the reservations in the early 1880s, were dying. The government had promised rations as part of the treaty agreements. The rations were consistently insufficient. The beef that arrived was often sick. The flour was often adulterated. The agents who managed distribution were often corrupt. Congress periodically cut the appropriations. People were hungry. A Lakota woman on Pine Ridge in the winter of 1883 woke to the same cold that Lakota women had always woken to in winter. But now the parfleche bags were empty. The government beef allotment had run out 2 weeks earlier. Her children had not eaten properly in 3 days. She had no buffalo to hunt. She had nothing. The reservation system had stripped the Lakota of almost everything that made their life possible. The bands could no longer move freely. The traditional political structure had been replaced by federal agents who answered to Washington. The children were being sent to boarding schools. Children as young as 5 were taken from their families, transported hundreds of miles, and forbidden to speak their languages or practice their ceremonies. The founder of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, Richard Henry Pratt, described his philosophy clearly. Kill the Indian, save the man. Into this world came a new religion. In 1889, a Paiute spiritual leader named Wovoka received a vision. The vision said that if the people danced a specific dance and lived righteously, the dead would return. The buffalo would return. The old world would come back. The ghost dance spread from Nevada to the plains within months. By 1890, thousands of Lakota were dancing and would not stop. The reservation agent sent urgent reports to Washington. The army came. In December of 1890, Sitting Bull was arrested on the Standing Rock Reservation. In the struggle that followed, he was shot and killed. He was 59 years old. 2 weeks later, a band under Chief Bigfoot was surrounded near Wounded Knee Creek by 500 soldiers and 4 Hotchkiss guns. The people had already surrendered. Bigfoot was dying of pneumonia, traveling by wagon. The soldiers were disarming them. A scuffle broke out over a rifle. A shot was fired. The Hotchkiss guns opened into the camp. In the first minutes, nearly half of the 350 Lakota were killed or wounded. By the end, between 250 and 300 people lay dead. More than half of them were women and children. Bigfoot was found frozen in the position of a man trying to rise. The Army awarded 20 Medals of Honor. Something did not die at Wounded Knee. It went underground. It waited. In 1885, a man named William Frederick Cody stood in front of 20,000 people in London. He was Buffalo Bill. His show, Buffalo Bill's Wild West, had been touring since 1883. It featured staged buffalo hunts, trick riding, theatrical battles between cowboys and Indians. Queen Victoria saw it twice. She pronounced herself delighted. And the primary Lakota performer in the show that year was Sitting Bull. The same Sitting Bull who had refused every American treaty, who had spent years in Canada rather than accept American authority, who had called for the gathering before the Little Bighorn. He spent 4 months with the show for $50 a week. He reportedly gave most of his autograph and photograph earnings to the white children who begged outside the show grounds. He said he could not understand a civilization that let its children starve in the streets while its leaders ate from gold plates. He left after 4 months and went back to Standing Rock. He was killed there 5 years later. What was happening inside Buffalo Bill's arena was not simply entertainment. It was mythology making. The story the American West required, as it was being constructed in the cultural imagination of the 1870s and 80s, needed the native people to be in the past, already defeated, already historical. The narrative of progress needed a clear before and after, savagery and civilization, wilderness and settlement. The problem was that the Lakota were not gone. They were on the reservations, alive, speaking their language, practicing ceremonies in secret. The myth of the vanishing Indian served a specific purpose. If you believed the Indian was vanishing naturally, then what the government was doing to hasten that vanishing was not policy, it was history. The people who disappeared did not disappear because their food was deliberately destroyed and their children were taken and their ceremonies were banned. They disappeared because that was what Indians did. They vanished. Edward Curtis began his photographic project in 1900, 40,000 photographs of Native people across the continent over 30 years. The work is visually extraordinary. It is also, in important ways, fabricated. Curtis routinely added props. He removed modern clothing and replaced it with traditional dress. He staged ceremonies that were no longer practiced. He photographed people in poses that matched his audience's expectations. When a man at an agency in Montana appeared in a cotton shirt and a hat, Curtis asked him to change. He wanted the buckskin. He wanted the past. The man changed his clothes and stood in the sun. What he thought about this is not recorded. The Wild West shows, the paintings, the photographs, the dime novels sold by millions since the 1860s. All of it working together to produce an image of the Lakota that was simultaneously romanticized and frozen. The image was static. Real cultures change. Real people adapt. Real communities respond to catastrophe with creativity and the pragmatic willingness to find new ways to maintain what matters most. The Lakota were doing all of these things. On the Cheyenne River Reservation, in 1905, a woman was cooking stew over a wood fire in a calico dress she had sewn herself. She was speaking Lakota to her children, quietly, because there were rules. But speaking it, she was teaching them the things that mattered. The ceremony, the relationship, the stories of the buffalo. The government could not photograph what she was keeping. It survived anyway. In 1994, a white buffalo calf was born on a farm in Janesville, Wisconsin. Her name was Miracle. Lakota people arrived within days. From Pine Ridge and Standing Rock and Cheyenne River, from Minneapolis and Denver and Los Angeles, they tied tobacco ties to the farm fence. They offered prayers in the language the boarding schools had tried to silence. Some of them wept. The theology had said this would happen. The white buffalo calf woman had promised, when she walked away from the camp those thousands of years ago, that she would return. Miracle was born white. Then she turned black, then red, then yellow. Then she died in 2004 at the age of 10. The Lakota who had made pilgrimages to see her came back to pray when she died. This is what survival looks like. Not the last warrior standing, not a frozen, dignified past, the survival of a living theology, practiced by living people, in a living language, on the same land where it was born. The census count for Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota peoples combined is over 150,000. The Lakota language, which the boarding system came close to extinguishing, has active revitalization programs on every Sioux reservation, immersion schools, language nests, where small children learn Lakota as their first language, recording projects, gathering the speech of the oldest fluent speakers. The effort is enormous. The obstacles are real. The language is not yet safe. But it is not gone. The Sundance was banned in 1883. It was practiced in secret for decades. It was not fully legal again until 1978. It is practiced today. On Pine Ridge, on Standing Rock, on Cheyenne River, in the cottonwood groves along creeks still called by their Lakota names, the drum sounds in summer, and the dancers move around the pole. The piercing is still done. The covenant is still kept. The buffalo are coming back. This is not metaphor. The Intertribal Bison Council has been restoring bison to reservation land since 1992. Today, more than 60 native-managed herds exist across the United States and Canada. The largest herds number in the thousands. The animals are being returned to the land they came from. Ecologists documenting the return find that bison grazing restores the grass diversity that cattle grazing destroys. Bison move constantly, letting the grass recover. Their wallowing creates microhabitats for dozens of species. Their hooves break the soil crust and increase water penetration. The grass knows the buffalo. The land remembers what it was. The Standing Rock protests of 2016 brought more attention to the Lakota and their land than anything since Wounded Knee, the Dakota Access Pipeline, the Missouri River, the water. Thousands of people came from across the country and the world. The pipeline was eventually built, but something happened at Standing Rock that was not about the pipeline. Something happened in the gathering, in the prayer circles, in the conversations between people who had never spoken to each other before. Something about a much older, much longer question. What is this land? What is it for? Who decides? The Lakota had been asking for 200 years. The world was finally beginning to listen. Something remains. There is a hill in the Black Hills that the Lakota call by a name meaning the place where the young girl swam. It is not on any map. It is not a tourist destination. There is no sign, no trail marker. The hill looks like 100 other hills in the Black Hills, forested with ponderosa pine, dry needles holding the smell of summer long into autumn. The Lakota know where it is. They have always known. The names they gave this land are a map of everything that happened here, not the history written down by people who came to take it. The history lived by people who had been here since before the writing. Before the maps, before anyone thought of putting a line around a piece of earth and calling it owned. The buffalo that once filled this land are mostly a memory, but the memory has weight. Standing on the central plains, in the silence between highway sounds, if you can find that silence, if you can stand still long enough for the human noise to settle, you can feel something underneath the quiet. Not the herd, not the drum, just the immensity of what was here. The 10,000 years of human beings watching the sky turn and the grass return and the animals move in their ancient patterns. The generations of Lakota women getting up before the sun. The warriors coming home in the blue light before dawn, tired and alive. The children learning the language that described this particular place with a precision no other language has achieved. Something was here that cannot be fully recovered. Something was done to it that cannot be undone. The history of what happened to the Lakota is sometimes told as inevitability, the march of progress, the closing of the frontier, the way of things. It was not inevitable. It was a series of choices made by specific people in specific moments for specific reasons. The choice to break the treaties, the choice not to stop the hunters, the choice to take the children. The choice to build the schools and beat the language out of the mouths of 6-year-olds who had not asked for any of this. Those choices were made by people who could have chosen differently. And the survival that followed, the language teachers and the bison herds and the sun dancers and the water protectors at Standing Rock, that too was a series of choices. Made by people who refused the ending written for them, who kept the fire burning in small places when large places were taken. We carry this history now, not because it is comfortable, because the Lakota did not simply live here. They understood this place in 10,000 years of careful attention at a depth that has never been replaced. And somewhere on the plains tonight, in the early summer dark, in a camp circle that is smaller than it once was but still lit, the drum is sounding. The grass remembers everything.